Combined yesterday and today's readings, we need to look at 6 chapters of Genesis, from chapter 10 through chapter 16. And there's a lot that goes on here. But it begins in chapter 10 with genealogy of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And as we look at the first ones, the descendants of Japheth, there's a bunch of names there for us. And the descendants of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, Canaan. Those four, we have Egypt as a country, and we have Canaan later as a country. And these sons of Ham go and they live in these lands, and it becomes, they become very populous with people that way. And in verse 30, the beginning of his kingdom, Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, the beginning of his kingdom was in Babel. And we know we're going to read a little bit more about that pretty quick here too. But a lot of, the genealogy, which was very important to the Hebrews to know all of those things that way. And so we have chapter 10 filled with that. Chapter 11, we have this interlude of Babel. The people, it says the whole earth had one language and the same words, and they migrated from the east. They came upon a plain, this land that we called Babel. And there they decided that, I think it's just funny, that it says, let us make us a name for ourselves, otherwise we shall be scattered upon the face of the whole earth. They're going to build this city and this tower that reaches to the heavens, otherwise they'll be scattered around the whole earth. God comes down, sees what goes on. We know what's going to happen, right? God confuses their language. He makes them so that they're babbling. They don't understand each other. And one language to another is just noise. And we understand that with so many languages on earth now. But their languages are confused, and they are indeed then scattered around the face of the earth. So what they were afraid of, they were going to build this big tower so that they would be unified, and instead their biggest fear that they would be scattered is what happens, because of they're trying to make a name for themselves that way. Let us make a name for ourselves, they said, otherwise, and it's just that's the way it goes. And then we have, starting in verse 10, the descendants of Shem, and we go down through all of those, and when we get to verse 26, when Terah, one of the sons of Shem, their grandson, greats, had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. So 10 generations from Noah, Abram is born. And if you remember, it was 10 generations from Adam to Noah. And so we have 20 generations here in the first 11 chapters, and of course, we don't have the whole story. And then Lot was the son of one of Abram's brothers, and Abram took Lot under his wings, after his dad Haran died that way. And Abram's wife, it tells us, was Sarai. And we have the story of Sarai, and Abram not having children, but long before that, Terah takes his son Abram, his grandson Lot, the son of and his daughter-in-law Sarai, and they go out from the land. So Abram's father is leading Abram and Lot, Abram's family, into this land of Ur of the Chaldeans. And when they get to the area of Haran, they settle there. And then chapter 12 begins with the Lord saying to Abram, go from your country, from your kindred, from your father's house to this land that I will show you, a promised land that I will give to your descendants. So Abram goes, and he takes Lot with him. And says that Abram was 75 years old at the time. And he's married to Sarai, and they travel. And when they get to the land of Canaan, they pass through that place, and the Lord appears and says, to your offspring, I will give this land. So Abram built an altar there and worshiped God and the promised land. However, there was a famine. And because of this famine being so great, Abram goes to Egypt. Evidently, famine wasn't so big deal there. But he moves to Egypt, and while they were there, when he's about to get to Egypt, he realizes that, his wife Sarai is quite a beautiful woman. And he's afraid that, the king of Egypt may, try to do away with him, Abram, so that he would be able to take Sarai as his wife. And so Abram says to Sarai, tell them you're my sister. We're going to lie to them. Well, this lie goes on, and, the king of Egypt, takes Sarai to be his wife. And, illnesses, sickness, plagues, just horrible things begin happening in the household of the Pharaoh. That's verse 17. The Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And somehow he figured it out. And the king says to Abram, what is this that you've done? Why did you lie to us? Take your wife and go. And so again, as chapter 13 begins, Abram goes from Egypt. He and his wife and all that he had, they go to the Negev, and Lot goes with him. And they get there, and of course, their flocks, their herds are so great that Lot and Abram need to split. So Abram says, if you go to the right, I'll go to the left. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. So Abram and Lot, separate. And Lot goes to the area of where the town of Sodom and Gomorrah and some of those places are. And Abram goes the other direction. And we know, what's going to happen in some of those instances after a while as well. But before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which we're not getting into, there was a war, a battle came out, and Lot and his family were captured and were taken away. And word gets to Moses, or to Abram rather, and Moses, that Lot and his family have been captured. And Abram takes his 316 or 318 men, whichever, I don't remember the number for sure here, but and they go and they succeed in freeing Lot and Lot's families and everyone that is there. And when we get into verse 17, after his return from the defeat of the Chaldoran and the kings who were there, the king of Sodom went out to meet Abram and wanted to pay Abram, give him monies, for bringing Lot and others back. And Abram's response is, no, I don't want any of your money, because I don't want it ever said that my wealth or any of that comes from you, from any other source. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten. And chapter 15 then begins with the word of the Lord again, coming to Abram. Do not be afraid. I am your shield. Your reward will be great. And then Abram, O Lord, what will you give me? Here I am. I continue childless. The heir of my house is Eleazar, a slave, not even, no relation at all. And God says to him, he takes him outside and he shows him the sky, and he says, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars of the sky. And Abraham believed that. And here is where we first read, verse 6, and Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. So righteousness of Abraham was because of his faith, his trust, his believing God's promise. And this is for us as well. Our righteousness comes because of our faith in God as well. And goes on, and it's interesting when we get to verse 13. The Lord said to Abram, know this for certain, that your offspring shall be aliens in a land that is not theirs. They will be slaves, and they will be oppressed for 400 years. 400. Think about that. This is God telling Abram that your descendants are going to be slaves in Egypt for 400 years, right? This is what happens. And it's after that 400 years of slavery that Moses comes and, sets the people free. But so, we had, the Tower of Babel, man, we got to do this or we will be scattered. And here we have God telling Abram, your descendants, that you're going to be so many, are going to be slaves for 400 years. It's just, I know I've read that before, but for some reason today that really struck me that, God knew what was going to happen. Chapter 16, Sarai had no children. She tells Abram, here's my slave, go into her and have a child. And Abram does. He forgets the promise of the Lord and lets his wife, manipulate him that way and say, well, let's do this. And of course, then we know how that story goes, that Hagar then begins to have disdain for Sarai. And, Sarai complains to Abram, and Abram says, well, do with your servant girl as you would have, and we find out that, and God says, the angel of the Lord says to Hagar as they, she finds her in the wilderness running away, that, you have conceived, you will bear a son, and you will name him Ishmael. And we know, we'll find out a lot more about Ishmael in the upcoming chapters as well. But this history of the Israelites and of God's leading and guiding, there are so many quick things that get told in this. We've gone, 20 generations, since already, and in just a few short chapters. But, you got to kind of look and pick out some highlights in there, and the one of the 400 years of slavery is one of those foretelling things that really stands out, that, God has chosen his people, God has promised Abraham, and yet, all of these things are going to happen.